Behind the Curtain with Jack Berkman.
Welcome back. Well, joining us now, Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner and a senior fellow with the Steamboat Institute. I love that. And we're going to plunge into talking about the French tax protests and the French oil protests. And you guessed it, the Yellow Jackets. Tom, welcome.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, ideology aside, these guys, protesters are getting smarter because they know in the tear gas you can't tell your troops from their troops, so you all better have the same color or you might be attacking the wrong people. Isn't that
right?
I guess at a very practical level, these are smart people.
Yeah, some of them are smart. The French culture of violent protest is quite deep in that nation. So
sure.
There is an expertise in terms of how to, mitigate the tactics the police employ, and we have seen that to significant effect.
Well, in some sense, the whole French post-war era. just looking back, when de Gaulle came to power, the Fifth Republic, and then in the late '60s when de Gaulle was in trouble. All of that. France has seen a lot of very serious protests that shake the republic from its core.
Yeah, it has, and we have seen this week that President Macron of France backed down. He has essentially given way to the protesters' demands. We'll obviously have to see what happens next, but the level of violence and chaos, quite frankly, in terms of transport and movement in the cities was, as you say.
If you look at the average person, like the French elites, of course, know what Macron is and his background. He was a minister in the previous socialist government and this, that, and the other. But the average person in France, this is my thinking. You tell me if I'm right or wrong, because I don't follow France the way I follow the UK. But the average person in France probably feels that they voted for a Trump-like person, somebody different and outside the system. Now they realize that Macron is just another socialist continuing Mr. Hollande's program, and that's all this is, with massive taxes all over the place. And they feel disillusioned because they voted for a change, and there is no change. Am I right?
Well, I think that's partly true. I also think, though, that the French feel that the economy is not doing as well as they would have hoped it to do with some of the reforms, and that that there is in France things in terms of the economic situation have been sustainably bad. So I think there is less patience. People want results immediately. Unfortunately, I think there is also a delusion that afflicts quite a lot of the French populace, in the sense that which afflicts them, they do not want to be necessarily reformed. They want easy reforms. They want, they still want to be able to retire early. They want very generous pensions. And then along with that, they want, economic regulations, business regulations that make it to protect their job, but inevitably make it hard to hire and inefficient in terms of allocation of resources across the economy. So these things that afflict France, I think President Macron's issue is that he hasn't been bold enough with at least the market liberalization reforms he's promised, not necessarily.
To borrow from Churchill, speaking about the Hitler's invasion of France, when will the lesson be learned? His famous phrase in the House of Commons, when will the lesson be learned? We can apply that here, thinking how many cases of the failure of this kind of socialism do we have to see before we realize that it just doesn't work? It's this perpetual optical illusion. I don't know, if I had to pay those kind of taxes, I might protest too.
Well, yes, and again, though, I think the challenge is that those protesters as well have been calling for, as well as the reduction of gas taxes, pension increases, hikes in the minimum wage, big new spending. So those issues are, to a significant degree, you can't. They want their cake and they want to eat it as well.
That's well said. Well said. Okay, so if you look at France now, France doesn't have a whole lot of places to go. One, you're a relatively small economy. You're part of a big system. It's not like the United States that can shake off a cold. When France gets a cold, the cold is serious business, and it can't really shake it off. They don't have a lot of places to go. Increasingly, those countries, other than Germany, are even losing control of their own monetary policy. They have titular control, but they're buffeted by all the shocks of the EU. A country like France is really just kind of hemmed in. And it would seem to me the only good news for France is Brexit, because you got a lot of financial firms that may want to start settling in Paris. But many of them may go to Frankfurt anyway. But Paris hopes to get some of these companies. But now we don't even know if Brexit will ever happen.
Well, I think it will happen, but, you are correct in terms of the opportunity. But, I mean, France is still a big economy with an educated workforce. Were they to address these structural inefficiencies in the system, I think their ability to create and foster effective economic growth would arise quickly.
Now, France is unlike the United States in that there is no Reagan that comes along. In other words, America is much richer, so the problems are never as bad, but if you look at America from 1932 on, we essentially followed a path that was similar to that of France. I mean, from 1932 to 1975, we had a pretty steady increase in the big state, in socialism, Medicare, Social Security, welfare, HUD, all of these things grew out and out and out. And then when taxes were at 70, 80%, along comes Ronald Reagan. He shakes the system, changes the world. France has never had that. France keeps going. They don't have a Reagan. Why is that?
Well, because I think they could have had their Reagan. I think Macron, if you look at actually his market reforms, he would have been, able to actually. I mean, he has a massive parliamentary majority, and he has a mandate to do some pretty bold reforms, but he hasn't done them because, in some sense, I think he's wanted to be conciliatory, the president who was popular, as well as reforming in a slow way. What he should have come in and done is been the hammerman and just sort of run bold with it. I also think the difference is America is a center-right country. I think France is, a centrist to center-left country. So the opportunity to push forwards with these sort of reforms in a way that people would sort of embrace wholeheartedly was never really going to happen in France. I mean, he was always going to reap the whirlwind. The problem is he hasn't been as bold enough, so the economic returns on that haven't been as quick or as significant.
Now, Macron, does he have any history? Okay, you say he's an investment banker. That's really his the only right-of-center thing about him, though. But he has the whole history of being a socialist. What, other than just talk about market reform and entitlement reform and all that stuff, other than talk, does he have any history of action anywhere when he was a mayor of whatever that city is? And is there any history of any action?
Well, not really, to be honest. I mean, he has his legacy before this was really being a banker and then being a sort of thinker about economic reforms. I mean, his legacy of action has not been that significant. I suppose that's one of the problems that he has been a disappointment for people in the sense that, he's alienated his own support base because they want him to be bolder. He's alienated his opponents because they don't like any of the reforms. And everyone in the middle sort of doesn't see the dividend, so they don't really like him. Is
he too young to do this? He was 39. Is that too young to do this?
Well, I don't necessarily think, that it's a negative, that he's too young.
40 years old is awfully young to run a major country. I just think that's awfully young.
But we've seen very successful entrepreneurs who were very young. I guess it depends. I mean, experience, you would think, as a general rule, is better for someone in a position of national leadership. But I don't think so much the issue is there. I think his broad economic reform ideas were very good, but he hasn't done a lot of them, or he's watered them down. And that you've just got to, he should have just, as with this protest movement, I'd written that it was, I actually agree that French gas taxes are way too high. So I think his policy was wrong there. But in terms of political leadership, he should not have bowed to the rule of the mob, because you do that in France, then your political capital traditionally dissipates very quickly.
All right, Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, senior fellow with the Steamboat Institute. Tom, thank you so much.
All the stories and controversies that no one talks about, but everyone should know about.
Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking.
Behind the Curtain with Jack Berkman.
Welcome back. Remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you got to call us 703-795-5364, 703-795-5364. Operators are standing by 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 to 7 Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. If you want to take it behind the curtain, your local press won't help you, and you need an issue to go before Congress, Washington, and the White House, you turn to us. We will help you here at Behind the Curtain. Remember, emails now coming into the 20th century, not the 21st, but the 20th. We do email. JackBerkman2016 at Gmail. JackBerkman2016 at Gmail. Now, same number, same email. If you know anything about the Seth Rich murder mystery, we will never quit on the Rich family or the city of Washington. We will find the killer or killers of Seth. We will get to the bottom of this terrible mystery. We will never stop. Joining us now, Curtis Ellis. Welcoming Curtis back to the show. He's a big part of the Donald Trump presidential transition team back in late 16. He has been the special advisor to the Secretary of Labor in the Trump administration and is the former executive director of the American Jobs Alliance. Curtis, welcome.
Hey, it's so nice to be back, Jack.
Well, how's the Donald doing these days?
He's doing great. He is just breaking all records, getting things done, and accomplishing things at a tremendous speed.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Even the market falling a little bit, who among us can be unhappy with the Dow at 25,000? Now, looking this China tariffs issue, the media says Trump is crazy. I say he's crazy like a fox. He knows exactly. This is my take on tariffs. There's an old saying in politics: you don't want the result, you want the issue. Now, Trump kind of knows that, sure, we want to do this populist stuff, but populist rhetoric, but you really can't have a lot of tariffs on China because the food chains, as he knows, as we all know, the global food chains have become too complex, too interdependent. You got to be careful with that stuff. So what he's doing is talking about it. And now you see in the past 10 days, he's kind of walking away from a lot of the China tariffs. Is that the right, A, am I accurate? B, is that the right policy?
Well, what we've seen here in Buenos Aires is setting a firm deadline. China has slow-walked us and gobbledygook talked us for 30 years, promising to make reforms, promising to address our concerns, endeavoring to improve things, endeavoring to open high-level negotiations. And these negotiations lead nowhere.
And it gets worse. And it gets worse and worse.
It gets worse and worse. Exactly right. Remember, Jack, we were told in the first place engagement with China would make China a capitalist democracy. It was essentially trade is war by another means. We don't have to send bombers and battleships and armies to China to make it a capitalist democratic country. We can send our factories, our jobs, and our capital to China, and that will make it more prosperous. And as it becomes more prosperous, our values will follow, and it will become an America-like country. Well, that's been proven to be absolutely false. So the logical question is, why are we doing business with them anyway? If the initial premise is proven wrong, and by sending them our brawn and our brains, our capital and our factories, is not making them more democratic and more of an ally of the United States. Instead, it's increasing the control of the Chinese Communist Party. What on earth are we doing?
Well, let me try it. You lay it out. You lay out the background so well. With that as predicate, let me lay out what I think is the policy choice, and you're the expert. You correct me if I'm wrong. The policy choice is, do we shock the markets and take the short-term pain from making appropriate changes in tariffs and trying to set the relationship straight, or do we ignore it all, avoid the short-term pain, and just drift on the way Obama did? Is that the choice?
You hit the nail right on the head, Jack. That's exactly right. There's going to be some short-term pain here, some uncertainty, some market volatility, some fluctuations, but we will get China onto the right path, or at least within the guardrails where we can deal with it and where we are aware and conscious of what and who we're dealing with. You're right. We've been drifting as Obama and Clinton and Bush and everyone before him. They either didn't know or didn't care the fact that this is a communist dictatorship. And remember, communism does not recognize a concept known as private property. So when we talk about intellectual property theft, well, of course, newsflash, they're communists where there is no private property. So they consider it theirs. Now, if you really want to understand what China is doing, I recommend everyone read the book that Donald Trump has read and everyone in the top levels of the administration, The 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury, who President Trump says he is the foremost authority on China today. And it's true. This man went over with Richard Nixon when China initially opened. He's been part of every administration since then. He actually brokered the deal where China was supplying, and this is a little-known fact, China was supplying weapons to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the Reagan years. We brokered that deal. Anyway, it's all in this book, The 100-Year Marathon, and it lays out China's strategy to replace America as the global superpower. Donald Trump is standing up to that. That's what the tariffs were about, moving some of these supply chains out of China to other places so we can be sure that the IT that we get, the high-level manufactured products, don't have trap doors planted in them by the Chinese intelligence agencies, and to force them to wake them up. The tariffs will have that effect, as we saw in Buenos Aires.
It's so difficult to negotiate and deal with. You talk about a 100-year marathon. I've often thought the Chinese can think as much as 500 or 1,000 years ahead, and they realize with their demographic advantages, they outnumber us 4-1 or more, 5-1, that the world is going Asian, and they're going to be the leaders of an Asia-centered world. And
that's their plan.
That's the plan. But it's going to be one of the problems with the United States, to digress for a little bit, is no matter what we do with all these issues, even if we play it right on our own economy, play it right with dealing with China, we may just be too small over the long run to compete with 3 billion Asians, right? Or 3.5 billion Asians. We might just be too darn small.
Well, that's interesting, and that is a good question to raise. You're asking the right questions here. Let me look at it from another angle. Just today, the news came out that our Secretary of Agriculture is looking for other customers than China for our soybeans and other agricultural products. If we're dependent on one customer, China, we're not in a good position. And that's the same thing. If we feel we have to sell everything to China, buy everything from China, or compete with China, we're in the subsidiary position. So we can still have an independent nation where we are producing and relying on our own domestic market to a large degree for our own prosperity. And then we don't have to be dependent on the numerically superior
One quick question.
Chinese.
I want to do a quick. I want to turn to just about a minute remaining. I want to turn to this hemisphere and NAFTA. Do you think does Congress approve the NAFTA deal, the new NAFTA that Trump has negotiated?
I think in the end they do. You're going to hear the Democrats squawk about it. They already are. There are some Chamber of Commerce Republicans that aren't happy about this part or that part, but that's why the president said he's going to withdraw from the old NAFTA. So then the choice becomes the new NAFTA or nothing. And I think there will be some tweaks and side agreements and enhancements to keep everyone, to reassure everybody that this is on the right track, that there's proper enforcement, that there is respect for intellectual property and patents, and American values are in there.
Curtis Ellis, Presidential Transition Team back in 2016, Special Advisor, U.S. Secretary of Labor in the Trump administration in the past, and now Executive Director of the American Jobs Alliance. Curtis, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
This is a universe where everything is depicted as a Washington Post political cartoon.
Behind the Curtain with Jack Berkman.
Welcome back. Remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364. Operators are standing by 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. We need your calls. If you have an issue that no one's helping you with and you need to bring it to Congress or the White House, you come. to Behind the Curtain, 703-795-5364. Taking your emails now, jackberkman2016 at gmail. Now, same number, same email. If you know anything about the Seth Rich murder mystery, we need to hear from you. We will never quit on the city of Washington or the Rich family. We will find the killer or killers of Seth. Well, joining us now, Damon Root, longtime contributor to this program, senior editor, Reason Magazine and Reason.com. Damon, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, this is a really interesting topic that I don't know a whole lot about, and I know you are the expert, and that is, this is the topic of what's called civil asset forfeiture. Now, for the benefit, you can lay it out better than I can, but just very briefly, for the benefit of our audience, the U.S. government makes money off a lot of seized property. There are all these drug offenses. Some are big, some are small. But during these offenses, the government will seize cars, homes, boats, everything. Now, some of this is justified. If you're dealing with some big drug dealer, obviously you want to seize his stuff and all that. It's part of the process. But part of this is becoming terrible big brother overreach, because what you have now is, some young kid that's 20 years old that might get arrested because he's got 2 grams of marijuana or 3 joints or something like that, and he gets slap on the wrist misdemeanor. But along the way, they seize his car and maybe other products, and they don't give them back. Damon, am I right?
Well, there's that. That's correct. But it actually goes even beyond that. With civil asset forfeiture, the police and prosecutors don't eat. People's assets can be seized, people who've never been charged or convicted of a crime. What the law enforcement will say that the property, whether it's a car or a house or a hotel, if you own the business, something like that, is they suspect it's being used to facilitate a crime, and then they will seize that. So in those cases, you have someone who's they haven't been arrested, they haven't been charged, they haven't been convicted, but their property is being taken.
So what happens? Say they seize some guy's hotel because they think there's a drug dealer running in and out of the premises, so they don't give it back?
There's a very laborious process that the owner can go through to try to get it back. But if you think about our criminal justice system, which is all about the presumption of innocence, and that due process of law means you get to have your day in court, and that the burden of proof is on the government, has to make its case. So the whole process is turned on its head. So there is a way you can seek to get your property back, but it can be very expensive. It can take years. Sometimes it's not successful. And meanwhile, you're talking about people who haven't been charged or convicted of anything.
And there may never be any charges filed or convictions, and law enforcement may forget the issue, move on, and keep the property.
Yeah, that's correct. There are critics of this that call it policing for profit, where you see that law enforcement is essentially it's sort of helping to fund its operations by seizing cars, and then they'll maybe sell them, and then the profits from that will go into the coffers, or maybe they'll just use the property themselves.
So in other words, you may have a bunch of dirty cops or something somewhere, dirty federal agents that will want this hotel for their own luxury purposes, and then they'll keep it as a property of this or that agency, and then they will just use it as a luxury facility and keep it. Is that what's going on?
I mean, unfortunately, the way the rules are is it doesn't require a dirty cop or a negative intent, although it's certainly someone who is coming from that perspective. It enables them to do the dirt. That really is the problem, is that there's no safeguards, there's no real checks on this. I mean, it's a basic question of due process, which is something the Constitution guarantees in the Fifth Amendment against the federal government, and then in the 14th Amendment against the states. And it's something that's basically being ignored.
Well, one thing that could be done, at least in terms of agencies that are under the president's control, like Homeland Security, Justice, FBI, others. I mean, maybe not NSA or NGO or SEC, but all IRS, but the ones under the president's control, any president could certainly issue an executive order stopping all these practices, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that the federal law enforcement could. This could be a decision made by law enforcement. Now, our now gone Attorney General Jeff Sessions was a huge proponent and advocate of civil asset forfeiture and really defended the practice very vigorously. So there was no hope for that kind of executive action with him there.
Now, why would he like it? Why would a conservative like this? Because they hate the bad guys and they just want to hurt the bad guys, or what's the thinking here?
This is a position that law enforcement generally is in favor of this practice. I mean, they would justify it as this is a way of targeting, ill-gotten gains from criminals. And certainly there are instances where you can directly trace some kind of a drug kingpin and then the vehicles that person buys with ill-gotten gains and so forth. I think so. So there are real instances where law enforcement has legitimate reason to seize assets. One of the problems is it's sort of gone off the rails in terms of the application. And I think that where the former Attorney General Sessions is coming from was a position that this is a tool that law enforcement can use, and law enforcement should have as many tools at their disposal as possible, and thinks that the sort of reform movement is, kind of a bunch of ACLU liberals who just want to kneecap the cops.
If I were president, one of my top priorities would be to scale back the whole concept of federal law enforcement, blue collar, white collar. I'd cut the budget of just about all of these agencies, Homeland Security, FBI, Justice, cut them all. I'd cut them all to bare bones, because I think all of this is out of control. And I think if it gets much bigger, you've created a Hitler-type apparatus. Now, fortunately, there is no Hitler, and it's never fallen into malignant hands. It's still in hands that are largely benign. But the danger is once you create the deep state apparatus, I think it's just a matter of time before you also have in this country a malignant ruler. Right? And then you have the full toxicity, the full malignancy, right? Isn't that what could happen?
I think that anytime you have a law enforcement with exercising vast powers, you have to be worried about what sort of checks and balances there are against those. And that's, I think, one of the big concerns on this issue is that this is something
what scares me, though, is it's getting worse. What scares me, though, is it's getting worse. Like, for instance, take the FBI. We learned, remember all that stuff with Christopher, whatever his name is, the spy stuff. What I took away from that, I wasn't so much interested in the issue as what the Bureau was doing. They have all these consultants on the payroll for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on retainer. The public doesn't know about it. The White House doesn't even check into it. They could, but they don't. There's all of this stuff going on that didn't go on 20 years ago. When the system reaches that point, isn't it just a matter of time before we're in serious trouble?
I don't know much about the FBI and the consultants issue, so I'm not sure I can speak to that.
Well, let me ask you this. In terms of the seizure issue, civil asset forfeiture, we'll go back to that. Are you seeing the trend getting worse? In other words, would you say in the last 25 years it has trended worse, or has it always been this way?
No, there's been a real increase in this practice, and it's something that the Supreme Court in a couple of decisions has enabled. I think the courts are starting to think about taking a second look at it now. But there was something called the innocent owner defense, where there was a case out of Michigan where a car was jointly owned, husband and wife, and the husband used the car to go pick up a prostitute in Detroit. He's arrested. The police take the car. Well, the wife she's innocent. She's a co-owner of the vehicle. She says, I didn't commit any crime. This half belongs to me. And this case goes to the Supreme Court, and the court said, well, in the civil asset forfeiture context, the innocent owner defense doesn't apply.
Well, why would they seize a car for a prostitute anyway? So you picked up a prostitute, you get charged with that. What's that have to do with the car anyway? It doesn't even make any sense.
You use the car to facilitate the crime.
Well, so what? Why does that make it the government? Who cares? Why would that make it the government's property? I mean, that doesn't. So they want to take it away from you so you can't do the crime again? I mean, I don't copy. They should punish the crime, not the car, right? Well, it's almost like you're trying the car.
Well, civil asset forfeiture proceedings are often directed against the property. So you'll see cases like United States government versus, 1956 Chevy, some case that has a name sort of like that seems very comical because they're targeting the property.
I think Congress needs, the owner. It would seem to me Congress needs to act. And they need to refine the law and say that there can only be civil asset forfeiture where the property has some integral role in a capital crime, or the crime can't otherwise be committed. I mean, if you seize a car because somebody gets a hooker, I mean, that's crazy because the car, they can do it in another car, they can do it without the car. The car has, it just strikes me as you're almost trying the car. It doesn't, I don't see any logic in that law. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, this idea in the law goes back to piracy. So you would seize the ship. The pirate ship is integral to the crimes on the high seas that are being committed. So you would take the ship, and so the car is how you transport the drugs. The car is how you go to whatever the crime is. the vehicle is part of you taking part in that activity.
What's your personal view on this? You've laid it out well. What's your personal view on what should be done?
Well, I think the Supreme Court should overturn the Bennis decision, and which is the innocent owner defense case I was talking about. I think that it would be nice to see legal precedents that restored a due process protection. The Supreme Court heard a case last week dealing with the excessive fines clause of the Eighth Amendment in the civil asset forfeiture context, where a guy who was involved in some minor drug offenses was arrested. The maximum financial penalty attached to his crime was $10,000. The police seized his brand new Land Rover, which is worth $40,000.
All right, Damon Roots, thank you so much. Boy, fascinating. We'll continue this. Damon Roots, senior editor, Reason Magazine. We will have him back. Thank you, Damon.
This portion of Behind the Curtain originally aired on November 17th.
All the stories and controversies that no one talks about, but everyone should know about.
Why don't you get a toupee with some brains in it?
Behind the Curtain with Jack Berkman.
Welcome back. Remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364. Taking your emails, jackberkman2016 at Gmail. jackberkman2016 at Gmail. Same number, same email. If you know anything about the Seth Rich murder mystery, we will never quit on the Rich family, never quit on the city of Washington, and never quit on this nation until we find the killer or killers of Seth. Our investigation at the Profiling Investigative Center is ongoing, and it will continue. Joining us now, Adam Coffrin, president of Safe Kids and founder of the HERO, HERO program. Adam, a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all ours, let me assure you. Okay, the recent shooting, Ventura County, Thousand Oaks, this seems to be getting worse and worse. Is this normal for a society of this size? In other words, are there just so many nuts and you have this stuff going on? Do you see a trend toward this getting worse? Let's first, before we get to solutions, assess the problem. How do you see the problem?
I see the problem as a little bit of both. I mean, we do have a increasingly large society, but the worrisome thing is the acts of mass violence is increasing, and it's increasing beyond proportionally what the increase in population is. While you've always had people that have been angry or upset or fight or, commit acts of violence, these types of active shooters of mass violence, of multiple casualties, is growing at an alarming rate.
And so you see a trend beyond just population growth. My business partner said, we were discussing this the other day, ironically, and I said, boy, this is terrible. Things are getting worse. He said, well, you have to remember the U.S. population has doubled since 1968. Since the time I was born, America's twice as large. If it's twice as large, you have twice as many madmen, twice as many killings, right? But what you're saying is that's not true. At least some of it's true. But you see a trend toward just more shooting generally, demography aside.
Correct. And so, when we talk about the mass violence, what we haven't really seen until the last 20, 25 years is people going in and shooting multiple people or hurting multiple people at one time or in one place. While we've had violence and we see the proportionate increase of violence, as your partner said, with the increase in violence, this is really kind of off to the side. It's like an anomaly in that we have people 5, 6, 12, 20 people being killed at a time in what really amounts to an act of mass violence or an act of terror.
So a lot of this, to what extent then, I guess the next logical question, to what extent is this driven by cable news? In other words, maybe we have this trend because these sick people, see themselves as celebrities like a la Charlie Manson. To what extent is this being driven by the fact that we now cover shootings on all channels 24 hours a day, whereas even 20 years ago, we didn't do that. A lot of it was treated more as a local news story. Now, every shooting that involves 2 or more people is a national news story.
Right. And I think some of that is really due to the 24-hour news cycle. News outlets have to put something on all the time. They have to have a story all the time. But aside from that, it is more shocking. If you had someone who maybe went down and someone was, let's say, shot or stabbed at the local market, very much local news. But just the shock to the conscience of 12 people dead, 20 people dead is really a national news story. And you're always going to have the copycats. You're always going to have those that watch what happens and say, I can do that, or I could do that better. This particular shooting is even more disturbing because he actually, in a social media post, made reference to that in quoting that hopes and prayers and keep me in your thoughts is what people say every time. And you wonder why these things keep happening. So he starts to really reference some of that news coverage and some of the social media coverage around
So
it.
you see directly these psychos are clearly being driven by that. Okay, let me ask you this. Let's talk about solutions for this. And this is really the big part of all of this. What can we do? What should we do? I, for a long time, have been a proponent of really arming the society. I think we need armed guards in schools, in churches, in synagogues, everywhere. I think the best way to stop a shooter is to have armed people waiting, take the Second Amendment to its ultimate conclusion. I think that's the best. What say you?
Well, that can definitely be a part of the solution. There's no one, what we would say, magic bullet, so to speak. It is really multiple parts of the equation. One is, of course, at certain locations that would be volatile, such as schools and churches, that you have people that are prepared for the worst. And whether that means having police officers there, whether that means having armed security, that's a portion of it. But you now run the risk of how militarized do we feel going to church or going to school. And we've even seen those who have been armed, whether they've been police officers or security, not always able to respond in a short amount of time. It might take a minute or two to cross a large campus or to cross a large church. And there can be chaos and pandemonium in that time. It's really what I believe is really a holistic approach. We look at obviously protecting these locations through security and different measures. We look at the mental health component of it. We look at people realizing what some of these behavioral signs are beforehand to help get these people some help or to stop them before some of these attacks occur. It's really a multi-pronged approach.
I guess, what can you do? I mean, the best police, like the police in Pittsburgh, which is my hometown, when the terrible shooting at the synagogue, they responded very well. I think the police got high marks, but still, how quickly can they respond? Even if they respond in 4 or 5 minutes or less, the shooting's over, right? So there's very little. Even the best police department in the country can only respond in a few minutes, and it only takes 2 or 3 minutes for the entire shooting. Or less. It can take 1 minute. So, as you say, a police response is very difficult.
It is. And as much as I hate to say it, it's really starting to become incumbent upon the citizens, the people, to have an idea and a plan for their own and for their family. Should something occur, from the time that person opens fire to the time that someone can get there to stop it, whether it's the people in the scenario or the police, what is their plan? What should they be doing? What should be the response?
As you suggest, maybe like part of the solution, just as you suggest, is self-policing, whereas schools need to do a better job. Which kids are a little loony, and how do we watch them? How do we help them? Can they be prevented? Should we detain them somehow? Churches need to be aware of, do we have any loony members here? Are there people exerting loony behavior, etc.? Maybe everybody needs to be on the lookout. If you live in a condo building, are there loonies that live here? Do we know there's loony? Let's watch them. Maybe we all need to become more watchful.
And that's exactly what we did right after the September 11th attacks. The government coined "see something, say something." And I think still to this day, it's never been more relevant in your neighbors, in the people that you associate with, in family members, even in friends. The people that have the most contact with these folks know something is wrong. There's some signs, or there's something that we know is wrong. And it's going either unreported or it's going unhelped for these other people to stop whatever it is that they may be planning.
Is there a public responsibility of the cable news channels generally, to get together and say, look, we're going to report the news, of course, but we're not going to dramatize it. We're not going to have music. For these shootings, CNN and MSNBC and Fox, they all have their own little music. They have music for war, music for shooting, music for soap opera. I mean, they dramatize it, right? They've got music for school shootings. I mean, maybe they need to stop doing that.
I think you have a great point insofar as it becomes an event. And these shootings, much like, the coverage of political elections, there's music and background. School shootings.
CNN hired someone to do musical score. They hired someone to develop musical score specifically for different kinds of shootings. I mean, I don't want to say that's sick, but that's pretty sick. Holy cow.
And, it drives ratings to some degree because people are so fascinated with this problem in America. And I think you make a great point. If we can really tone down some of the sensationalism and the stardom that some of these people get, either if they survive the event or post their death in the event, these are names that are synonymous. We can name the Columbine shooters. We can name some of these shooters throughout history. And why they should not, in my mind, be a celebrity.
I mean, part of it is if you have some derelict living on the street, some guy that's basically a hobo, and all of a sudden he can be famous. I mean, in his twisted mind, why shouldn't I do this? I'm starving to death anyway. Why not be famous on TV? I think that's the way a lot of these people think.
Well, a lot of them have a grievance of some sort. For someone to wrap their mind around hurting a lot of people, there's a grievance. They feel they've been victimized. They feel they have nothing else to lose. There's something that has turned in their mind that has allowed them to want to do this and make it okay with themselves to eventually become a celebrity or to hurt a bunch of people and to become infamous to some degree. So you're right. What do they have to lose? And now I'm getting back at society for whatever the feeling is that I've been wronged.
Adam Coffrin, president of Safe Kids, founder of the HERO, H-E-R-O program. Adam, if we're real lucky, we'll be able to have you back again. Thank you so much. Well, remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364, 703-795-5364, taking your emails, jackberkman2016@gmail, jackberkman2016@gmail. Same number, same email. If you know anything about the Seth Rich murder mystery, we will never quit. Remember, even when we're not on the air, you can hear us and see us and read all about us at jackberkmanradio.com and, of course, always at radioamerica.com. Thanks. We'll see you next week.